Although it's not primarily defined by social difficulties, those of us with ADHD may have a hard time forming and maintaining friendships and relationships. But today, communicating is basically the biggest part of my job, so let me break down my top tips and everything that I've been practicing to improve my communication and socializing skills as somebody with ADHD. So to be clear, social struggles in ADHD usually stem from impulsivity, inattention, and emotion dysregulation, leading to situations where we might interrupt people, we might zone out in conversations or miss social cues, and we may react in ways that are not expected from our conversation partner. These sorts of behaviors can lead to peer rejection, misunderstanding, social anxiety, and we might actually end up isolating ourselves if we have enough terrible social interactions. If you're new here, hi, I'm Anna. I have a master's degree in neuroscience and cognition, and I also have a clinical ADHD diagnosis. I share strategies backed by research and my own lived experience about living life with ADHD or a busy, ambitious, and overwhelmed brain. Welcome back to Skills That Stuck, the 5-part series where I share everything I learned in therapy after I was diagnosed with ADHD. This is episode 3 on socializing and conversations, but if you missed part 2, it was all about impulsivity, and if you missed part 1, that was all about emotion regulation. All the episodes in the series kind of overlap and interact with each other, so I do recommend you watch all of them because I will be referencing across episodes. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a licensed therapist and this is not a replacement for your own therapy. I'm definitely not your therapist, so please be mindful that what worked for me might not work for you, and take what resonates, leave what doesn't. I'm pretty sure everything that I share is quite safe for anybody to try, but if you know something I don't, please share it in the comments so that we can all learn. And with that, let's dive in. So friendships and social interactions are something that I did really struggle with as a kid, and there's still something I do have to be mindful and intentional about as an adult. I would often impulsively say things, forget to reply to people, sometimes my facial expressions would slip through without me meaning to non-verbally communicate something to somebody, and I often get very anxious about being misunderstood. This is something I worked on a lot when I was in therapy after my diagnosis. For context, I did 12 weeks of very helpful cognitive behavioral therapy with somebody who is trained to work with adults who have ADHD. The tools I share in this video are just the most practical things that I took away from therapy, and I'm sure many of us would benefit from these skills in both our personal and professional relationships. A quick note before the first tip, I'm also thinking of doing a post all about the science and psychology behind conversations and social interactions and how that all works, so let me know in the comments if that is something that you would be interested in. The first thing we're going to talk about is how to stop accidentally ghosting your friends. If you're like me, you probably often feel very overwhelmed and very short on time. Many of us with ADHD feel this way because of our shortcomings. We often feel like when it comes to our career, our studies, if we're not ahead, then we will probably fall behind. So we worry about all of the productive things that we should be doing, and we push our social lives to the bottom of our priority list. But social connection and friendships are incredibly important for our overall well-being and functioning, and connecting with people actually helps to prevent burnout. So figuring out a system to make time for friends is vital for your well-being. Most of us have intentions of being really good friends, but our symptoms can sometimes make it difficult to keep up with people even when we deeply care about them. So here are some tips for sustainably including our loved ones into our lives. Take a moment to reflect on how deeply and how often you want to stay connected with different people in your life. Think about some of your close friends, your immediate family, your long-distance friends, your extended family, anybody that you want to keep in touch with regularly. Now ask yourself, how often do you want to call these people, and how often do you want to meet up with them physically in person? Now communicate with them and plan in regular times for these events to happen so that they happen at least this often. So for example, my friend group from my master's degree has a scheduled day once a month where we meet up and hang out. I call my parents every Sunday, and I also call my grandmother every other Sunday. So you can do things like that. One way to make hanging out with friends easier is to incorporate them into your activities that you already do and enjoy. So for example, you could invite a friend to that workout class that you attend regularly, but before you both go, you meet up for coffee together an hour beforehand so you have time to actually talk and chat and catch up, and then you can head to the workout class together and spend time together there. This also works for other hobbies like arts and crafts or watching movies together over video call. I just want to have a quick note here that obviously every person is different and different friends will react to this in different ways. I'm lucky that I have super cool friends who really understand me and are cool to work with me on these sorts of strategies, and I also have some really cool friends who have have reached out to make a plan on what sort of approach we're going to take if we aren't seeing each other regularly. For example, there's a friend that I used to hang out with quite often when I was doing my bachelor's, and now that they've moved to a different city, we don't see each other as often, and I'm really bad at reaching out. They texted me and they were like, hey, how do you want to approach this friendship moving forward? They've noticed that they text a lot and I don't initiate as much. Is that because I'm not interested, or is that because I just struggle to initiate or don't want to initiate? And this was actually really great because I could communicate like, hey, no, I love talking to you. I'm just not very good at remembering to initiate, or it's not something that I really do much, even though I care about you deeply, but I appreciate it when you initiate the conversation. And they were totally cool with that. They just understand now that if they want to hear from me, more often than not, they will have to initiate the conversation. And because they're cool with that, they don't take it personally. They don't think that I don't care about them. They know that I love them and that I think about them often, even if I'm not reaching out. And it was really good to have that open conversation with them about the strategy that we're going to take for our friendship, instead of them taking it personally and thinking that I don't care when I do. Now, let's talk about how to deal with when you accidentally say something offensive. If you're like me, you have probably left a conversation at least once in your life with a cold pit in your stomach, wondering, why did I say that? We're often taught what not to say in conversation, but we're rarely taught how to clean up the mess when we accidentally blunder. Even with our best intentions, sometimes our words come out wrong. We might be nervous in the conversation, or something impulsive might slip through if we're feeling emotional. Even an unfiltered facial expression might affect somebody before we realize we've even made it. Now, most of us are not mean people, and we don't intend to be rude. In fact, I know that if you're watching this, you are a kind, well-intentioned person, but mistakes do happen. And because these mistakes can be more frequent for those of us with ADHD, it's important that we know how to deal with them. This is something I struggled with a lot when I was a kid, because I also have ASD and anxiety interacting with my ADHD. So when you miss social cues and then you respond impulsively and then you start freaking out over how people feel or what they might think of you, it creates a little bit of a vicious cycle of social blunders. But these tips helped me a lot. So the first thing to do is, as soon as you realize that you have offended somebody, apologize. When you apologize quickly and you take responsibility for it, it helps them see that you meant well, but it came out wrong and that there was a misunderstanding. If you start feeling your emotions bubbling up, then use some of the emotion regulation strategies that we talked about in part 1. I really advise that you politely excuse yourself and take some time to regulate before you come back to the conversation. But if that's not possible, then take a deep and slow breath before you continue. Something really helpful if you know that you are going to have a difficult conversation with somebody is to prepare beforehand. So write down your thoughts and the points you want to make, and if it's possible, if there is somebody you can confide in, go and run your points through with somebody that you trust who can keep this information safe before you do the difficult conversation, so you can prepare for the types of emotions that might bubble up and the types of reactions that you might experience. On a similar note, let's talk about interrupting people. Many of us with ADHD accidentally interrupt people, and it can be for a variety of reasons. But the thing is, interrupting people makes the conversation clumsy, and it can harm social interaction and even harm our professional interactions. So it's really important that we learn ways to work with our brains on this one. The first step here is to figure out why you interrupt people. Is it because of impulsivity? Is it because you're afraid you'll forget what you want to say? Is it an emotional thing? Is it because you're actually trying to avoid listening to your conversation partner because maybe they're saying something that you don't want to hear, or maybe the conversation is boring to you, so you're trying to change where it's going? Each of these reasons needs a bit of a different approach. Now, the next thing to do is to let people know that you have a tendency to interrupt and why, and let them know and show them that you are working on it and you mean well. I've personally noticed that just being upfront and honest about this in places where it's safe to disclose what's going on with me really helps people be a lot more patient and understanding with me and to work with me on these challenges that I face. The next step is to note down your interrupting thoughts when they pop up in conversation. I'm being dead serious. I carry a little pocket notebook with me. This is the bullet journal pocket edition. This is not sponsored. They're just very convenient to carry around. And if I feel the tendency to interrupt somebody or to blurt out an answer while it's still their turn to talk, I'll just quickly note it down in shorthand. I often warn people that I have a little notebook with me so that they're not surprised when I bring it out. But this helps me know that my thought that I want to bring up is safe. I'm not going to forget it, and I can safely let it go. It's nice and parked in its little parking lot, and then I can carry on with the conversation. And the last step for interrupting is to let the other person know that they can tell you when you are interrupting them, and to wait your turn. This one might feel super awkward at first, but it is totally okay for your conversation partner to let you know that you have interrupted them. And it's okay for them to ask you to wait until it's your turn to speak. It is your job and my job to practice conversational turn taking and to practice the other tools we mentioned for managing impulsivity and emotion regulation. I know this one might feel super confrontational at first, but if you both know that you're doing it and why you're doing it, then it can really help you practice the necessary skills to get your conversations going smoother with people. The fourth topic I want to cover is how to deal with accidentally taking over or dominating the conversation. If the conversation shifts to one of our interests, those of us with ADHD might turn a dialogue into a monologue accidentally because we get super excited about what we're talking about. As you can imagine, taking over a conversation is not the best way to make friends with somebody who wants to talk with you and not be talked at by you. But another reason we might end up accidentally dominating the conversation is because of our disorganized thoughts. Many of us feel like we have many different thoughts popping up at once, and it can be really hard to choose which path we want to take the conversation down, so we might jump from one point to another and take over the conversation without letting them get a word in. So first, how do you know if you have taken over the conversation? Take a moment to stop and notice how your conversation partner is doing. If they seem bored or tired, then you may have taken a longer turn talking than would be polite. Try to notice their facial expressions or body language for cues that it's time for you to either close the conversation or hand the floor back to them. If you are rambling because of unmanaged hyperactivity, then it may be more helpful to channel your hyperactivity through a different outlet. Working out regularly can help us manage hyperactivity in general, but if you know that you're going to have a conversation and you don't want to ramble, it might help to journal beforehand to get all of your thoughts out and a little bit more tangible before you talk to somebody. You could also do some breath work first to kind of regulate yourself so that you're not as rambly, or you can walk and talk so that your body is doing something while you are talking so there's less noise going on in your mind, or you can also play with a fidget as long as it's not distracting you or the other person. Now, you could be dominating the conversation because you just have a lot to share, and in this case it might be more productive to share things in a group setting rather than one-on-one, just to diffuse the pressure of your conversation partner. But be mindful that in a group setting you do still need to let other people talk as well, but this just helps you have several audience members in a way to diffuse your conversation with. Now, of course, distractions during conversations are also a big issue, and distractions can be both internal and external, and they can seriously interfere with our engagement in the conversation. So we'll talk about both, starting with internal distractions. So racing thoughts, mental restlessness, bodily sensations, pervasive memories, trying to remember everything on your to-do list, or disruptive ideas are all examples of internal distractions. I really advise that you let your conversation partner know if you are having a difficult time with internal distractions. This way they can either be a little bit more patient with you, or if you have a lot on your mind, it may be better that you both decide to have the conversation at a different time. Like in the hyperactivity example, you can also walk and talk or use a fidget toy to try and manage your internal distractions. And you can help manage your internal distractions by practicing active listening techniques. So when your conversation partner stops speaking, you can summarize what you understood from them in your own words and then ask them to just clarify that you did indeed understand them how they meant it. It also helps to bring back that HUTS framework that we talked about in the last episode, where you check in with yourself and see if you are hungry, upset, tired, or stressed. And if that's the case, you may not be in the best state for a non-distracted conversation because your internal sensations may be disturbing you. Now, external or environmental distractions can also quickly derail us in conversations. These include sounds, movements, and other attention-grabbing stimuli in our environments. Now, for those of us with ADHD, these are particularly distracting because we struggle to filter out the not important things in our environment, and we are very sensitive to different changes in our environment. This is because of a part of our attentional system known in the ADHD sphere as our floating attention, which is basically always scanning for changes. So some tips would be to find a quieter place to talk and to not be exposed to as many visual distractions if you can help it. So do not be the person facing the window in a conversation. It also helps to turn your phone onto do not disturb or airplane mode when you're having the conversation, and ideally put it somewhere where you can't even see it. Otherwise, just keep your phone face down on the table. Again, you should let your conversation partner know that you do tend to be distracted, but that you mean to pay attention to them and it's not that you don't care. And if you do lose track of the conversation, tell the person honestly that you got distracted and ask them to repeat the last few things they said. But it really helps if you can tell them the last thing you remember so they know where to pick up from. The last thing we're going to talk about is being sensitive to criticism and feedback and how to deal with that. Now look, criticism and rejection and negative feedback are just part of life, so we do need to know how to deal with them. But those of us with ADHD are known to be especially sensitive to critical feedback, even when it's supposed to be helpful. This is most likely due to our troubles with emotion regulation, so similar emotion regulation strategies can really help with sensitivity to feedback and criticism. Now, I just want to make a quick note here that you may have seen this experience described online as rejection sensitive dysphoria, but I have intentionally chosen not to call it that in this video because rejection sensitive dysphoria is not well supported or validated in the research as being something distinct from emotion regulation, which we do have really well defined. I want to emphasize that rejection sensitive dysphoria is not a clinical diagnosis or even a recognized symptom, and if it does end up being its own phenomenon one day, that's great and I would love to know, but right now there is no sufficient evidence to support that it's its own thing aside from emotional dysregulation. Now, I'm saying this because I want to be really careful not to spread misinformation as far as I'm aware of it. So as always, please also look into things yourself and approach everything online critically, and don't be afraid to ask questions and ask people for their references and check things, including me. So what to do when criticism upsets you? If you receive criticism, take a moment by yourself to reflect on it and figure out how you feel about it. I personally find it really helpful to journal about this. Now, let the other person know how their criticism has affected you. Ask them what exactly they meant by what they said so that they can clarify the feedback. I don't want to invalidate your experience if you have indeed received hurtful feedback, but it's also important to know that those of us with ADHD often struggle with what are called cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking patterns, like jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing and imagining the worst case scenario, emotional reasoning, and black and white thinking, oh, it's always bad news or it's always bad feedback that I get. So it is important to be aware of this so that we can give people the opportunity to clarify what they meant and make sure that we aren't thinking ourselves into an upset state. I would also try to advise you to pick up points in the feedback that are actually practical and helpful. This helps you shift the focus away from negative feelings to things you can actually work on and grow, and will actually make you feel better when you improve at those skills. And again, if you feel your emotions bubbling up, take some time to use the emotion regulation strategies we talked about in part 1. You'll notice that a lot of this comes down to emotion regulation because it's kind of at the foundation of everything. Before we recap, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss anything from me. So today we talked about the skills and tools I learned in therapy when it comes to socializing and conversations with ADHD. We chatted about how to stop accidentally ghosting our friends by being a little bit more intentional with planning in time to catch up with them. We went through what to do when you accidentally offend somebody, which is to apologize as soon as you realize. Similarly, we spoke about how to handle interrupting people and how to prevent it by parking our thoughts in a little notebook. We also tackled some skills to practice when it comes to taking turns in conversations so that we don't end up accidentally monologuing at people. Then we went through strategies to handle internal and external distractions during conversations. And lastly, we talked about sensitivity to feedback and criticism. If you made it to this point in the video, I would love for you to drop your favorite emoji in the comments below, or tell me what your biggest takeaway from this was, or if you have any feedback for me, because this channel is pretty new. And if this resonated with you or you want anything clarified, then you'll love the full article I wrote about it on Substack, which is linked in the description below. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and I will see you in the next one. And as always, stay curious, stay connected, and turn your potential into action.